This is a wonderful pair of readings today. The Carping Spirit is an extremely important one for us to grasp, and the importance that it's given in the Bhagavad Gita is here that Krishna tells Arjuna that the reason that Arjuna is going to be able to receive all of this divine wisdom is because he's not a complainer, essentially. He's freed of the carping spirit. So I was trying to think what the implications of that are, because it's not merely that Arjuna was pleasant to be with because he was a positive, supportive guy. There has to be a whole lot more behind the relationship that's drawn here. In the Bible, St. John says about Jesus and about those who wish to be in tune with him, to all those who received him, to them gave he the power to become the sons of God. And when you read that on the face of it, you would think, well, anybody who was with Jesus would want to receive him. Anybody who thinks of Jesus now would want to receive him. That's the whole point, isn't it? But St. John is making it clear that not everybody did, because everybody would have become like Jesus himself, would have received that full power if they were able to receive it. So what John was really saying is those who are able to receive it. So then we have on the Gita side, we have this, that Arjuna is able to see it because he's not carping anymore. Carping is a word that we don't always use all the time, but it's a very good word to analyze. And it's not even, it's even called the carping spirit. So it's a whole attitude toward life. And it's a particularly pervasive attitude among people who go from the intellect, which is the whole American culture as a group sort of goes from the intellect because we are so economically oriented and money oriented, and money requires a certain shrewdness and a certain astuteness. We're always analyzing with our intellects and trying to understand how one thing fits with another and so on like this. I've talked about it at different times. But the carping spirit is when we're always trying to see what the flaw is in it. We can look at things always in two different ways. You can see everything that's going right, because almost always something is going right, or you can see what's going wrong. And both perspectives are always true. You see someone dressed in a way that isn't particularly attractive, but maybe the color of their socks is very nice. And maybe nothing matches anything and doesn't flatter them, but the color of their socks is still very nice. Yogananda received a letter once from a man who was criticizing Yogananda, Master as we call him, was criticizing Master very intently for all the things he'd done wrong. And it was one of Master's own disciples. And when Master spoke to the disciple, he rebuked him for the contents of the letter, but he said it was one of the best letters that Satan, meaning the dark force, has ever written me. And he encouraged the man to take up writing. I mean, that's really looking at the bright side. You were on the wrong side of the issue, but you expressed it really well. Now, the carping spirit is whenever there's anything that can be criticized, we must criticize it. And why? The question then becomes, what does that say about our inner consciousness? Because what's happening here is that particular spirit blocks our ability to receive the divine flow. I mean, what is the divine flow? Unconditional love, kindness, a sense of untouchable happiness in all circumstances, a sense of security, of certainty in our place in the world. It can go on, calmness, the ability to face difficulties with joy. So the carping spirit must be the opposite of all those realities. So what would make us inclined to see the faults in things? Well, we can start at the top. Who's in charge and who's making this world in the first place? I remember when I was a small child, I always would ask my father my big questions. I asked him, because I could see, being full of the carping spirit, that much that happened in the world wasn't going very well. So I asked my father why so much why there was so much incompetence on the planet. And he thought for a moment and wanted to phrase it just so. He said, well, there's so much important work to be done. He said, it's inevitable that some of it is done by mediocre people, was his response, which I vividly remembered that because it was such a carefully crafted and excellent answer. So we're looking around all the time, whether we don't really have to look any farther than our own friends and neighbors. People have different levels of competency and different levels of how they go about doing things. And often people who have very important jobs that we think really have to be done a certain way are just not done that well. I mean, let's start with, how about the President of the United States? I mean, we don't have to think just in terms of how you make a cup of coffee. There's a lot of stuff that goes on this planet pretty darn continuously that is completely bewildering, just completely confusing. Why would anybody make decisions like that? So there's this natural inclination then to take it apart and say that it should be done differently. But the question becomes, who's really in charge? What's really happening on this planet? Is it really just a collection of egos, and the ones with the most force get to have the most influence? Is it really just random who gets elected, who has power? And we look at many parts of the world, what we face in the US is nothing compared to what people are facing all over this planet, where you have not merely people whose opinions you don't respect, but you have absolute evil scoundrels in positions of power to exercise great force over evil people. Whoa, that's really easy to criticize, isn't it? In the course of a class yesterday, we were having a discussion and someone just threw the phrase out, of course God wants everything to be harmonious and happy in this world. And it was merely an introduction to what she really wanted to say. But I had to stop her there because anything that follows after that is going to be based on a false premise. It's not true that God just wants to be everything to be harmonious and happy here. He wants us all to learn to be in tune with higher consciousness. He wants us all to be instruments of divine realization. He wants all of us to overcome all limiting karma that causes us to be insecure, lonely, afraid, a feeling of impoverishment, suffering from physical pains, and so on. God has a very simple and deep and deeply uplifted desire, which is what my friend was trying to say. But that desire is not about circumstance. That desire is about our consciousness. And if we think about our lives, we realize that our circumstances are training our consciousness. And whether or not we are actually trained or merely just waddle along until it's over is a choice that we have. But circumstances are constantly challenging us. This is anything but a happy and harmonious world. Now, this goes to explanations like the great cycles on the planet that are taking place, where our solar system is in relation to the center of the galaxy. This is the whole study of the yugas, about which there is a marvelous book in our boutique, so I'll just send you there to buy it. But the planet, the physical world that we're living in, is merely the backdrop in front of which we get to act out the true drama, which is the evolution of our own consciousness. And inasmuch as we take many bodies over the course of this divine journey, one after another in reincarnation, and as Master put it, when Swami asked him, do we always come back to planet Earth? Oh no, Master said. There are countless planets that we can incarnate on. Countless planets. And we go to a planet that's at a very high state of development where things are actually all happy and harmonious. Or we go to one like this one, for example, where things are going up in certain ways and fragmenting into a mess in other ways because of what it creates in us. Last week, for those of you who were present, I talked a lot about the present state of the world and the naturally anxiety-producing result of what we see happening all around us. But that is precisely the spiritual challenge that we're facing. So whether we're facing potential nuclear war, the loss of our home because of the loss of a job, or we're just dealing with some really crabby person at work who is always just doing things to make our life miserable, whatever it is, something in our condition disturbs our inner peace. And so when that happens, we have two simple choices. We are having an experience of our consciousness being disturbed. Do we then try to say, why are they always like that? These people are always making mistakes. Why can't we get the right government in here? Why does this happen? That's not right. That's not right. That is the Carping Spirit, which is whatever happening, it's just wrong. Now, this doesn't mean that we never make an effort to fix things. But you can make an effort to make things better because you see something beautiful in front of you and you really want to manifest that. You see a beautiful painting, a beautiful song, beautiful harmony in your own home, a better way just to do some small thing. Master said we should always be innovating in a creative way, absolutely everything that we're doing in our lives. We should never just be sitting there and saying, oh, this is good enough, I'll just keep repeating this until I die. We should always be thinking, oh, how else could this be done? This is good, but what could be better? That's not the Carping Spirit. That's the creative expression of an ever-expanding sense of the possible. The Carping Spirit says that everything is wrong out here, and I'm just going to keep pointing it out. How is that working for you? Husbands love to be corrected by their wives. Wives love to be corrected by their husbands. Have you noticed that? Children adore being nagged by their mothers. How is that working for you? The President of the United States loves for you to blog about what he's doing wrong. How is that working? Right? And when we get into that mindset, what we're fundamentally saying is this really isn't about my consciousness. I'm not really on this planet to expand my awareness and open my heart. I'm really here to point out what everybody else needs to do to be better. So how much wisdom can we receive? How much of God's loving presence can we receive? How much are we on the wavelength even of what's beautiful and what's possible? I lived for many years in very close association with Swami Kriyananda, who certainly had the capacity to guide and correct on a level that no one I ever knew had that capacity. And he used it more judiciously and more carefully than anyone that I've ever met simultaneously. His awareness was always, we are all in this journey together, and everyone is moving as well as they can imagine for where they're going. He had a beautiful phrase which I absolutely loved. When something would happen and people would behave a certain way, he would often say, I understand why you feel that way, which was such a marvelously realistic but utterly non-committal and non-critical way of speaking things. I understand why you feel that way, given your level of delusion and the endless pointless desires that completely surround you. I understand why you feel that way. He didn't have to say all those, and he didn't even really mean them. It was just looking out with this heart of compassion to realize what the point is here. And so on our own spiritual journey, if we want to, let me phrase it, let me go back and think of it in a different way. What I'm coming to here is that, very often in our lives, when you try to trace an attitude down to its very core, it keeps coming back to whether or not we believe that there is an infinite force that is in charge of this world, that is benign in its intention and wise in its expression, that is there to help us. and whether that power pervades this universe and everything in the universe is conspiring for the enlightenment of all the souls who are on it. It's a very, very fundamental belief, because every time we complain about the way people are behaving or the way the world is going, we're actually challenging the one who's in charge, aren't we? My father, who tried very hard to be positive in all circumstances, he loved to tell this very sweet story of, there was a little community, a retirement community in the town where my parents lived in Claremont, California. And missionaries from around the world of many different denominations came there to retire. It was called Pilgrim's Place. And once a year they would have the Pilgrim's Festival, and all of the missionaries would sort of set up little tables right in front of their homes in these neighborhoods. And they would bring out unusual things. Sometimes they would sell things from around the world. And it was just a nice community event. And my father made a habit of going, and it rarely rains in Southern California, but on this particular day it was raining. So the whole event was a little bit inhibited because of the water that was coming down, umbrellas, plastic. So my father, being a little cheeky, says to one of the missionaries, "You would think, after all that you did for God, that God would give you good weather on this day. Don't you think so?" And the missionary responded backwards. He said, "Weather is a decision made by management. I was always in sales." Isn't that perfect? I love just the way of thinking about it, isn't it? Well, I'm not in management here. Whether we're in sales or whether we're in service or whatever aspect of it we are, who is making the decisions, and why are they? Why is he or she making those decisions? Is it for me to learn something, or is it for me to have the pleasure of pointing out what's wrong with everyone else? Whoa, how tempting that is, isn't it? Because if it's not wrong with them, it has to be wrong with me. A woman friend of mine, Swamiji gave her the manuscript for one of his books, and he wanted her to help him. The subject was a specialized subject about which she knew a great deal. And in preparation for talking to him, she was calling me every night. And her criticisms of the manuscript, I just could not figure out, what is she talking about? It was so nitpicky. It was so carping. That's the word. She was just carping about all these different things. She was a very intelligent woman. About the third conversation, in exasperation, I said, "What is going on?" And I sort of surprised her, and she blurted out, "If I can't make him wrong, then I'm going to have to listen to what he says." Meaning, as long as I can diminish his authority, then I don't have to be subject to his advice. In other words, I get to keep my delusions and stay exactly as I am. "Oh," I said, "I understand this. We're talking about fear. I get fear. Fear is no problem. Let's talk about fear. Let's stop talking about the manuscript, okay?" And then we did. We talked about fear. We talked about what we're attached to, what we think might happen, what spiritual authority really is, who is Swami Kriyananda, what does it mean to be a disciple. There's no quick and easy answer to that. We don't just sort of come and sign up and we get initiated and now no problem from now on, I am, look at me, the perfect disciple. I played that out with Swamiji for a few years at one point. He gave me the job of running the publications business, which was one of the more notable failures in my career. I just was absolutely hopeless at it. But I was primarily hopeless because I refused to let Swamiji teach me anything. He kept trying to teach me how to do it, but I thought as a good disciple I had to already know. We were so complicated and so goofy. So he kept trying to help me, and I kept resisting all his input, and then he would pile on more suggestions, and I resisted this way. "Oh, yes, sir, I'll do that. Yes, sir, that's a good idea." And then I would do nothing. Swamiji described me, when I don't know what to do, my policy when I don't know what to do is to do nothing. My friend Shivani, whom some of you know, he contrasted us. When Shivani doesn't know what to do, she does twice as much of it. Everybody has different ways of coping. I would freeze. So for 2 years, Swamiji just kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing until the difference between my actual inner feelings and the perfect person I was trying to be just became so profound that I just began to fracture. At which point, this wasn't the first time this happened, but he said to me, "How are you, Asha?" "I don't know, sir. How am I?" I just learned to sort of say, I wouldn't answer. "I don't know how I am." "Well, how do you think I am?" "Well," he said, "I'm worried about you." I said, "I'm worried about myself." And then his response to me was, "You never fooled me." That's what he said. All that trying to shine on and be just perfect, he said, "You never fooled me. I could feel what your real attitudes were underneath it." And really, we never fool anyone, and least of all, we don't fool God. But the person we're trying to fool above all is ourselves. We want to be perfect. We all have so much to work out. Really, there's nothing to be ashamed of. We know what free souls look like, and, well, we aren't. Let's just take it. We just aren't. And it's nothing to be proud of or ashamed of. It's just exactly what we are. So when all these extremely interesting things happen to us that are so upsetting and disturbing and run us into these cycles of self-criticism or criticism of others or tremendous outrage at thus and so, after the storms die down, we have to realize that the Carping Spirit is thinking that somehow God is not in charge. Now that's a really scary thought. And, of course, it takes great determination and will and careful observation and very wide-awake thinking to really come down to that very deep and solid belief. Who is in charge? What is the intention of this creation? And am I cooperating with it, or am I thwarting it? And you see, you don't have to be perfect or good at all. You just have to cooperate with it. No, we show up, and we show up with the karmic bag that we're carrying. And we come into exactly the right spot, just exactly the right spot. And everything conspires around us to help us, sometimes by pleasing us, and sometimes by torturing us in one way or another. But if we have that inner relationship, whether as a disciple or a child of God, or as a devotee of truth, however you want to phrase it for yourself, it really doesn't matter, that we have this instinctive inclination to say not who did what to whom and why are they wrong, but what can I learn from this experience? And what response will bring me into greater and greater harmony with those divine qualities that I wish to make my own? Now, this is the only thing that works in the end. And we're all, especially here and in this particular area, we're all very, very smart. We're very smart. And we're very good at analyzing things and just making them just so. Many years ago, at the guest program, what's now called the Expanding Light, the guest facility at Ananda Village, the people in charge were not really very talented at that particular job. Swamiji had put them in that position. I don't remember whether it was an individual or several people, put them in it for the sake of their souls, and it was not working so well for the sake of the project. And I was his secretary at that time, and some man wrote a letter explaining sort of what was going on over there and what the flaws were and what was wrong, and I thought it was a great letter. I was really good, and I if the letters weren't confidential, I often read them first so I could help him with the answering of them. And so I said, "Oh, Swamiji, this is a really good letter about what's going on at the retreat." And Swamiji was aware of it too. It wasn't like he thought that things were better than they were. I said, this is a really good letter. Swami read the letter. He balled it up like this, and he threw it on the floor. I've never before since seen him do anything like that. It was for my sake. He balled it up. He threw it on the floor. He said, "Anybody can tell me what's wrong." He said, "I want someone who says, I will take responsibility to make it better." You see, that's the difference between the Carping Spirit and being able to receive that creative, uplifting, power of spirit. Sometimes the way to make it better first is to realize what's wrong, but after that, we have to step in to make it better. Now, even if that's just somebody being very unkind to you, how do we make it better? Do we make it better by fighting fire with fire and proving to them by careful analysis and debate, point by point, how really stupid their thinking is? Or do we make it better by having faith in their goodness and faith in their ability to rise, and kindness, or if we can't be kind, by at least running away and being neutral, just staying away from it? This is what Swami Kriyananda did for us forever. He just always believed in us. Even when we made the biggest messes in the world, and trust me, we did. I can understand why you feel that way. It's not that it's a good way to feel, and it's not working for you, but I can understand it. What a gift that is if we give that to each other, isn't that so? Just, isn't it amazing in your life when somebody really loves you? Isn't it amazing when they know who you are and still love you? Isn't it amazing when no matter how much you mess up, you know you can always go there? I used to be very, very critical of myself. I always held myself to a standard I could never meet, which is a very handy system because then you always can feel bad. There's just not any time at all when you don't feel bad, because you're always imagining that you should be like this, and of course you aren't, so you're always here. So you always get to feel bad, which for some reason worked for me. For a long time, much longer than I'm proud to admit, it worked for me. Now I have a gap in my thinking here. Let me just figure out where I was going. Oh yes, and when I began to realize that it wasn't working for me, I had a friend in my life. I have more than one, but this one particular friend who made perhaps more mistakes than many. But for some reason, the relationship between us, or my heart toward hers, was just absolutely accepting. I just always believed in her, and I always understood, no matter how wacky she behaved, I could just feel her goodness, some past life karma. So I started playing a fascinating game. Whenever I would mess up, which was pretty regular because of the standards that I held myself to, so pretty much everything I did was inadequate, I would always pretend, I started pretending, that it was she who had done it. And I pretended that she was bringing to me that particular failure, and then I would respond as I would have responded to her, which was always, don't worry about it, we'll work it out. And then I started finding out what fun it was to say that same thing to me. Don't worry about it, we'll work it out. And all of a sudden, that carping spirit, that tendency to criticize, just begins to go away. And what replaces it? Kindness, hope, love, happiness, and faith in God. And that's why Krishna says to Arjuna, oh, you've freed yourself from all of these attitudes that block the presence of God. So now I can give myself to you, to all those who received him. To them gave he the power to become the sons of God. Isn't that a marvelous prospect and worth pursuing? God bless.